Good morning and welcome to the second morning of Verticon. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning at the Simulation and Training panel discussion. We have some of the experts from the largest training centers and simulator manufacturers here to discuss simulation and training today. They're going to share their perspectives on helicopter simulator flight training, current and future simulation devices and applications, and how to enhance the training journey through technology and simulation. So I'll introduce myself. The panel is not about me, it's about the panelists here, but I'm a pilot, so it is a little bit about me. My name is Matt Presnal. I'm your moderator for today's panel discussion. I'm what they call the Chief Theoretical Knowledge Instructor for Coptersafety in Helsinki, Finland. Which means I oversee all of our ground training programs for all of the different aircraft types we train, 125, 145, 139, and 69. Yes, I did come all the way from Finland to be here with you today, but I'm also a native Texan. So I welcome you to the great state of Texas and Dallas. So let me introduce our panelists a little bit here. So first I'll introduce Lindsay Cunningham. She is the Managing Director for HELISIM LLC right here in Grand Prairie, Texas. HELISIM LLC is a helicopter flight simulation training center owned by the HELISIM Group and Airbus Helicopters and a Thales joint venture company. Prior to joining HELISIM, Lindsay served in various roles at Airbus Helicopters in the United States to include aviation safety and accident investigation, commercial programs, legal and compliance, and customer training. Lindsay holds an FAA fixed wing and rotorcraft pilot's license and has a genuine passion for promoting safety in the rotorcraft industry through training and technology. Welcome, Lindsay. Next is Zach Haeussner. Zach is the Director of Programs at True Simulation and manages a team delivering state-of-the-art flight simulation devices to companies around the world. His expertise spans 10 years in operations, engineering, and project management, with a strong foundation in business systems and continuous improvement. Zach holds an MBA from Babson F.W. Olin Graduate School of Business and a Master's of Science in Engineering Management from the University of Central Florida. Welcome, Zach. Next up is Randy Gawenda. Gawenda? Oh, sorry. My apologies. Randy is the Business Development Manager for rotorcraft and military segments at FRASCA International. Having been at FRASCA International for 16 years, his former responsibilities include Part 142 Training Center Manager, Part 141 Chief Flight Instructor. Randy is also a member of and contributor to the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team, as well as a VAR webinar guest speaker. Again, welcome, Randy. And last but not least, Mr. Chad Sparks. Chad is the General Manager of the Bell Training Academy. His responsibilities include the safety, operations, performance, strategy, technology development, and regulatory compliance of Bell's global training solutions. Chad and his international team deliver world-class pilot and technical training, enabling greater operational safety and mission efficiency to Bell operators around the globe. So there's lots of reasons why I can tell you that simulation and training are important, and to integrate simulation and training into your training programs for different operators. But I will talk about one of the most important to me, just to open us up, is safety, right? And just to throw out some statistics and numbers, just so you have an understanding of how simulation and training can benefit us all as operators. When the United States Helicopter Safety Team examined about 104 U.S. fatal accidents between 2009 and 2013, found 104 U.S. fatal accidents over that 4-year period. And when they examined those further, they found that 52 of those accidents, or 50%, fell into 3 top occurrence categories. First was loss of control in flight. Second was unintended flight into inadvertent IMC, or UIMC, or IIMC. And the third was low altitude operations. So out of those 52, 21 of those fatal accidents, or 20.2% of the overall 104 accidents, were identified in what the US HST called the Helicopter Safety Enhancement 123, which was titled Increased Simulation Education to Develop Safe Decision Making. So if you think about it, that's 21 fatal accidents that may have been prevented by flight simulator training, educating pilots on situational awareness and how to deal with those types of situations. So I just want to kick off the discussion with first a lightning question for our panelists here. And I'm just going to ask you to each of you to think off the top of your head and name one type of simulation training device. I'll start with you, Lindsay.
Okay, Level D full flight simulator, FFS.
Yeah. All right, Randy.
Level 7 flight training device.
Yeah.
Virtual reality level 3 trainer.
Love a good old-fashioned desktop emulator.
Desktop emulator. All right. Those are good examples. Thank you. So that kind of leads us into the first question. So if we're thinking about training devices that you all just listed, which are all helicopter simulated, most of you have some form of these training devices at your training centers or for the manufacturers that you're actually building these. But if you think about the aircraft that you have at your training centers, like the 125 or 135 or 45, Chad, for you, a 505, a 429, or hopefully a 525 coming soon. Yeah. We're really seeing a representation of some advanced aircraft that are operating today. So Lindsay, I'd like to ask you, at HELISIM, is training in some of these advanced aircraft just mentioned, with the evolution of these highly automated aircraft, how does that affect the training in terms of needs for the level of training devices, whether it be FFS or FTD or any of these other devices that we mentioned?
So, great question. It's one of the things that we're seeing, at least with the Airbus fleet, and I expect the other manufacturer training centers are seeing with their fleets as well, is basically the evolution of avionics and software. So we have our classic levels of training devices that are maybe built on more the kind of stick and rudder skills, but as we get into these various software versions, how do we maintain the integrity and meet the standards of the simulation training device and ensure that people are getting that actual software training that they need, and how do you serve a fleet with various software versions, even though maybe maybe a variant of an aircraft fleet has multiple software versions out there. How do you design and approve the simulator to ensure that each pilot operating those various levels of software are getting the training that they need? So especially for the medium twin fleet, I don't think we're going to get away from level D FFSs anytime soon, but maybe we need to look at, and I think we are looking at, how do we augment that training with maybe desktop emulators, iPad apps, etc., to ensure that there is a very firm understanding of a respective version of software to ensure that autopilot functions are well understood, etc. One of the challenges we're seeing, and especially those of us operating with OEM data packs, and for those who are not, how do you ensure that the version of software on your simulator or any device that you're using is fully aligned with the OEM software version? So some answers, some questions in there, but that's definitely one of the trends that we're seeing.
Yeah.
So
Chad, I mean, it kind of plays into you as the same as a training center. How do you see that topic?
Yeah, I think to Lindsay's point, there's an interesting trend as we build out courseware for the more sophisticated platforms like 525 and others that have got a really sophisticated avionics package on board. It has really driven us towards building out, courseware that is aligned with, okay, I've got a full-blown integrated avionics course for 525 that we've developed. It's a full 4-week course. It's time in academics, but it's time on the maintenance training device. So we've got a full aircraft that's got the full avionics package on it. But, to the point earlier, we've got a set of bench trainers that we also use that rather than tying up that full asset as a training device, I can peel off parts of those students into a practical training session where we can interject faults, we can interject different software modes into that desktop trainer, really allowing the knowledge that we need to pour into those customers when they come to the building is really targeted in the right way. The other thing that we've added at the Training Academy has been a couple of specialty courses. And so, the basic A&P skills that you get coming as a technician into the industry, we've got a couple of courses that are focused on specific avionics and electrical troubleshooting. Maybe not type specific, but it's all about, can I shoot a wire? Can I understand, what basic Garmin software loads are? Do I understand what the test sets are that I need to interface with as part of it? That I think, check. That I think give a real opportunity, again, just to, we've got a real simple mission at the Training Academy. It is simply to make Bell customers safe and effective with our aircraft. And so as long as we're thinking about that every day and giving them the tools to do so, that's how we're anchored.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you both. So I think, just from my perspective, what I'm getting here is that there is no silver bullet training all-in-one encompassing device, right? So each device kind of complements the next level of training and that level of safety. And as we continue through the training journey, right, there's all these different levels that can complement the entire package. So, Randy, this question's for you. I'm interested to get your view here, because if we see these different levels of training devices as tools in the overall training journey, how do we choose the right tool for the job? I mean, we got all these different technologies and different training tasks. So how do we choose?
That's a good question, Matt. And it starts with, some people may do that more formally in a training needs analysis. Some people may just know these are our normal methods, our operations, this is our normal mission, and essentially kind of talk through and ask questions about what is out there. FRASCA builds an entire range of products, so it is not a one size fits all. So like what we typically say is, what I typically say is, you don't want to hang a painting with a sledgehammer, and you don't want to break up your driveway with a tack hammer. You're not going to get very good results from either of those. So ask questions. You have to kind of educate yourself. And simulation is kind of a weird niche within aviation, right? The aircraft and all that is pretty straightforward. But as Lindsay and Chad have pointed out, we're getting a lot more integrated avionics. So is in the aircraft the best place to learn those systems? Absolutely not. What's a cost-effective way of doing that? What's a safe way of doing that? We have a lot more distractions in the cockpit now than we used to. Learning to manage our cognitive workload, and looking at the levels of learning of familiarization and, training and proficiency. What's a cost-effective system? It's no longer just we're going to do everything in the aircraft, or we're going to do everything in a level D, because that really just economically doesn't make sense, for one, and two, it's really not the best way to learn.
So that's a great answer. Thank you. So, Zach, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into this discussion and the needs for different levels of training devices and choosing the right tools, right? So, as a TDM, how does the TDM collect and translate the needs of the industry into developing these different products, these different training tools that we can use at the training centers and the customers can use? How can operators and customers help you with this?
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. So when we think about maybe where Randy just left off and how that transitions into the effects it has in the manufacturing business and the development world and manufacturing these training devices, True in particular saw that their product portfolio, from a desktop trainer to an FTD, wasn't able to meet some of those demands that we're seeing in the marketplace and for certain pilot curriculums. And so we did reach out to Bell, and Bell in concert with True. And those of you that don't know, Textron Corporation has multiple brands and companies within it. And we're really fortunate at True Simulation, where we can reach both the fixed wing OEM with Textron Aviation, as well as Bell Helicopter. And so with Chad's team and the integration they had with our team, we built this Veris virtual reality platform to fill this market void that True at the time wasn't able to meet. We recognized the technology curve was just about right where we should enter. And with that, the VR device is enabling us to now have a more constructive conversation with these training centers, startups, operators, and identify where these devices, now that we have across the board, can fit into their program. When I think about it from moving from like a product that's introduced now to the market that can fill the void when you're making that perfect selection on how you want to build your program, I think about True, and from the TDM's perspective, we do it two different ways, or two ways where we solicit voice of customer. One's more tactical. So those of you that have worked with a training device manufacturer, you may have been on board for those first 90 days in the program that you purchased into and been part of a design activity, right? Design development activity. We take you through this design phase, and this is where it gets pretty tactical, where we take your functional requirements, those things where you want maintainability, accessibility, usability, and we break those down to technical requirements. Very tactical, but it's real. We sit in boardrooms with you, and we talk through how that transforms a malfunction into those critical criteria that you want the pilot to experience, or your pilots to experience. So from malfunctions to the design of the control systems to, okay. So we move it into that device development. So what's really great for us, the TDM, and I think in turn it's really great for those that are engaged with us, the buyers, the customers, is that you can develop your training curriculum real time with us. Our products, are 12, 18, 24 months in duration. And so we're kind of building and constructing this with you alongside your curriculum, especially if you're building it for the first time. So now it's customizing the fit. It's us being able to take these new systems or product changes and put them on a shelf that we can pull down later. And so now we've got even more tools for selection on the next buyer or the buyer we're working with to pull down and enter into whatever kind of curriculum they look to set up. That's the tactical side. Tactical side is we're kind of building on and developing these legacy products into enhancements that fit your needs. On the strategic side, we reach out back to this project that we have now with the Verus device. We reach to Bell and we create these customer advisory boards that we can sit down and really break down those functional requirements at pace to the research and development process, trial and error, iterations of development. And we've done this, we've showcased this. Now that we've got both the Verus that fits into that niche and that fills that market void, we also have things like the iOS system that's becoming a more user-friendly experience, right? We have the control panel, which is a new launch for True in particular, that creates a more maintenance-friendly experience. Reducing costs and expenses at these training centers and kind of outreaching to all these needs that a new training center or training center in change would want.
So this brings up another thought while I was listening to you talk and answer that question. As we were discussing what input goes into simulator product design and development, a lot of the aviation professionals that are coming into the space today for pilot training, they're part of the millennials, so the Gen Y, Gen Z, generation of people, of students. And they've spent their entire lives surrounded by using digital technology, right? Making it an integral part of their lives and everyday activities. Most of these people coming into the market, they show up with an iPad and a phone already in their hand or under their arm. So when we talk about these generations and their preferences for learning, work, and communication, they all have these different thinking patterns, ways of learning, and ways of progressing along that training journey. So, Chad, again, this question is for you and you as well, Lindsay. I'd like to ask, how does the Bell Training Academy and HELISIM determine the instructional differences that may be needed between generations, and what adaptations, whether it be a device or a training method, do we need to make for students to thrive during this training journey that they're on now?
I appreciate that question, Matt. So, just by quick show of hands, I'm the proud owner of a 23-year-old and a 21-year-old in my house. I don't know if anybody's in a similar category, but, they are wired differently. I mean, the impact in that generation, not just of kind of a global pandemic, but they have learned to consume information in a very different way than certainly I'm a pretty traditional Gen Xer, and I've got ways in which I consume information, but they thrive on short form video. They thrive in ways that are wired around gamification. So, as a training industry, we have to adapt, and it is a little bit of a struggle, candidly, because we have multi-generational customers that come through the building. So trying to figure out how do we hit the mark with all of those different generations of customers that come through the building. And so I definitely see a trend towards, trying to modify our courseware. I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make our training experience, more affordable, more accessible, but more impactful is kind of the last leg of the stool there. And that impactful piece is all about how do you purposely target that specific customer in the building and, you know, their reference point for how they consume information. So, you know, one of the things that we have done actively today is, you know, having the benefit of being an OEM, we have access to all the design data, which is a delightful mass of information. But we have leveraged gaming engine technology in order to bring that into an immersive training experience. And so rather than having a pretty traditional, like, congratulations, here's the next hour and a half of PowerPoint that we're going to walk you through on systems, descriptions, and designs, we have fundamentally an immersive 3D experience for the customers. So we've got regimented, like it'll walk you through systems of the aircraft, and whether that's avionics on 429 or hydraulics on 505, but you get kind of the entire 3D representation. You can manipulate the whole aircraft. You can zoom in, zoom out. We have standard kind of camera views as you walk through this 3D experience. But then if you have a question, say Terry here in the front row asked me, like, wait, I don't understand what that cotter pin is doing on that part. I'm like, stand by. Like, let's fly in, let's go explore that together as part of it. And so you have this much more visual way in which we communicate to our customers and our students in the building, on a way that we can personalize that and still make it interactive while still hitting the mark on, you know, there's a certain scope and sequence we need to follow from a training experience. And so that's one example of what we've got today, but I believe we need to keep progressing towards, you know, how do we drive gamification into our simulation environment? How do we take, you know, that experience today and even, you know, consume short form video? Where does remote learning play into some pieces of this? Because, you know, I love having people come to Dallas-Fort Worth or Valencia, Spain or Singapore. That's not where all of our customers reside, unfortunately. And so again, along the theme of how do we make training more accessible, there is a remote learning appetite. How do we do that effectively is, I think, the challenge. So there's a couple of things that we're thinking through, and I'd love to get Lindsay's thoughts as well.
No, I second what you just said, and I think, yeah, providing multiple means of training aids for people who learn differently, verbal versus visual, et cetera. I think the pilot population, maybe we would say, is already a little attention deficit, and then you get that even younger generation of pilots who are even maybe more so. So you start talking about micro learning, little pieces at a time, things that are relevant to your point, Chad. Not a 6-hour day of PowerPoint slides about all of the different systems without applying those different systems to particular scenarios or making it relevant. Also, even with the e-learning modules, which I think those can facilitate the micro learning, but how do you ensure that those e-modules are interactive? Because even as a training person and a former compliance person, I admit that when I do e-learning courses, sometimes I'm just clicking through them as fast as I can to get through. And did I answer that question right? So, but how do you really ensure that people are actually engaged and actually getting something out of that e-learning? But those are just some thoughts.
Yeah.
So.
Just to add on that, you know, I pointed out kind of the desktop emulators earlier. You know, one of the things I think the interactive nature of learning is really important in order to cement the knowledge in customers' minds. And so, you know, one of the things we're doing on 525 is we have an entire in the classroom experience, we have an entire touchscreen desktop emulator. So for the crews that come in, they've got a full set of displays of the G5000 and the center console. It's all touchscreen, so as we're walking through a specific checklist or sequence in the pilot training course, they're able to interact with that during the academic experience. And so again, when we transition to the next tool in the sequence and we go to the full flight sim to start the flight experience, they're that much better prepared, having, you know, spent time in a lower cost but yet more effective training environment before we wrap up the cost and time in the level E full flight sim.
I'd love to give an angle here that some of you may not recognize. So our as a TDM, we build training tools to facilitate your training centers. Last week we were celebrating an event, and at the facility we drew about 20 to 30 engineers. They're all between the ages of 22 to 30 into a Mario Kart competition. So Nintendo's Mario Kart game. And this is really important to kind of capture. This event was powered by a couple employees that we had, and they put it on as a social event for about an hour over a lunch period, and it got loud and it got entertaining, and I had to step in at some point and say, guys, we're about to get back to work. What are you looking at? What are you doing? As we poked our nose in there, I started to see some of the engineers in the kind of the user interface side of our company and our design team pointing out buttons, pointing out the sizes, the colors, some of the haptics that you get from the controllers. These are the same team members that are designing the next generation of iOS or Instructor user stations. And in my opinion, this is where we can help as TDMs, these training centers, be more efficient in executing training for their clients and customers and pilots, is creating the ability to navigate these training devices so easily that there's not a distraction between that and the real value add that they provide to the pilot community. This is where our engineers are today. I mean, we're meeting them at their DNA, which is from the day they were born to where they are today. I mean, they haven't seen anything that's analog, all right? And so as they start to create these new training devices, they're leaning on their experiences and they're creating these more user-friendly devices to enter the market.
Awesome, thank you. So I'd like to keep on this topic of adaptations of training methods and devices, but change it just a little bit, because simulators are, just like you've all been describing, especially suited for situations which are practical, difficult, dangerous, and expensive or difficult to reproduce, right, in a real world environment. So Randy, this next question is for you. I'm interested in tapping into your knowledge and experience here as a chief flight instructor and as a TDM, when we talk about adapting scenario-based training into the picture. So how can training centers utilize scenario-based training and simulation, i.e. different sectors, EMS, law enforcement, firefighting, and how do the TDM design the tools to help introduce and utilize those scenario-based training?
Thanks, Matt. And I think it's important to note that good helicopter simulation really hasn't been available for most people up until probably the last 15 years or so. It hasn't been very usable simply because visual graphics and things like that weren't available, weren't able to replicate the real world in a real enough fashion for you to fly a mission in a simulator the same way you would in the aircraft. So I think, and I'm always leery when I say that because, we're helicopter pilots, we're always different. But if you look at the fixed wing world, if you're a professional pilot in the fixed wing world, you're going to get in the simulator multiple times throughout your career. On the rotorcraft side, that hasn't always been the case. In fact, it's seldom the case. A lot of times the thing is, okay, we're just going to get in the aircraft and we're going to do our training in there, which again ticks the boxes. It makes you regulatorily current, but it doesn't necessarily make you any safer, any more proficient, or better. You're just doing the same things. This is something we talked about on the webinar too. Was just, what's the definition of insanity? You're doing the same things we've always been doing and expecting different results. When you talk about the accident statistics and things like that, that was something some of the U.S. helicopter safety team leaned into specifically, is because this is an area of training and learning, quite frankly, not evaluation, that we're missing. And it's been on the fixed wing side with what we used to call law flying, oriented flight training for, again, 30 years. But it's using the simulator to do those what-if type scenarios where you're not just training or teaching somebody to be proficient in how they operate the aircraft. It's teaching them how to use good aeronautical decision making. And you can do that in a very, very compressed time frame as well, too, where, in 3 days or 2 days of scenario-based training, you can acquire a bunch of aeronautical wisdom, rather than just proficiency, because you can do things in a very controlled environment, in a controlled fashion, and you can also allow the student to learn. A lot of times when we're in the aircraft and we're training or whatever, we have to have a safety net over everything, right? We got the aircraft, our student, public, everybody else that we need to make sure that we're keeping safe. In the simulator, a lot of times when you do good scenario-based training, it's putting somebody in a environment that's familiar, that's realistic, and allowing them to experience good decisions and bad decisions. It's not necessarily an evaluation tool, because everybody can get in the aircraft and, hey, in 1.3, we bang out another 135 recurrent. We're we're good for another 6 months. Please leave me alone so I can go back to doing my job. That's not going to fix things up. So I think, we have to look at the tools we have, whether it's FTDs or VR or full flight, and say, hey, we do have the tools to do this. The aircraft is an expensive asset. We don't necessarily want to use the aircraft for that and can't. But this is an area where we're still kind of missing the boat of the capabilities. We're using simulation in a pretty standard, pretty straightforward fashion, and we're missing some of the advanced levels of how we do some training for aeronautical decision making. And that's not everybody. I see it employed here and there in pockets, but as an industry, we're not really grasping onto some of the more advanced benefits we can do by using simulation properly.
If I can add something, Randy, and I think Lindsay's got a similar course at her academy as well. One of I think the most one of my favorite courses that we offer at the training academy is a double IMC course that we use in a simulation environment. And again, that is really all about trying to create some muscle memory and confidence for pilots to get themselves in situations that they never intended to find themselves in. But they've got the muscle memory and the proper aeronautical decision making coming out of just spending a day or so with us. I mean, it's not a long course, but it's not something that you go chasing double IMC conditions in a real aircraft. Like we're gonna go do that in a sim and really create a set of skills in a pilot that brings them home. I've talked to more than a few pilots that have found themselves in difficult double IMC situations, and we're grateful to be having a conversation with me at that point. The more as an industry we can build really meaningful scenarios around that using simulation, I think it's a value to us all.
Yeah, I'll add a fun kind of knowledge pin to it. So we found ourselves exiting that tactical design phase and development of a program that was facilitating a customer who had to deal with some pretty aggressive runway takeoff and landing scenarios for fixed wing aircraft. And we, over the water cooler, heard the pilots kind of complaining about some of the realism, and that's butter for us. So we immediately latched onto that, started to ask more questions. It turns out some of these scenarios that they're having to deal with are runways that are cluttered with kangaroos. And it wasn't but maybe 5-6 days before we had an extension or an enhancement to the program that enabled us to bring in these entities, and not only one or two, but I guess I think they're called groups, or it's not even a herd, but enabled them to actually add these moving entities onto these runways, further expanding those scenarios. So I would definitely offer up some recommendations to anyone that's in the middle of this phase in their program for a new training device or considering one. Do not hold back. When you have critical scenarios, we want to meet you at the place that you fly or your clients fly, and that could be adding in animals to an airfield or entities in an airspace or parts of a malfunction that you'd like to expand upon versus what you may find in your RFM.
And if I may add something, I mean, to add on to that, just maybe building a little bit of free time into the syllabus. So obviously you're covering all of the points that you need to cover, but I know something that Bell probably struggles with, I can say Airbus struggles with the same. You have customers for an initial or recurrent course. You could have a law enforcement customer, an air medical customer, PBA, all kinds of different missions in the same class. So how do you build a syllabus that's relevant to each of them? So maybe you add in a little, 20 minutes into the session, and at the beginning of the class, just ask them, what do you see as your biggest risk in your operation? And if we had free time in the sim, what would you want to see, or what would you want to experiment with? I think is a very valuable thing for those who are kind of forced to do a little bit of one-size-fits-all training. So
1000%.
So I'm keeping on this topic, scenario-based training. Many operators have expanded the use of simulators to include additional operation training, specific training, just like you guys were just talking about here. It brings the question to my mind of real-world reporting and information from our safety organizations, such as US HST or EST in Europe, regulators, there's some here in the audience, and also the OEMs. So I'll post this to Chad and Lindsay. I'd like to hear your perspectives from the OEM training organization perspective on the topic of fleet data. So how can we better use actual fleet data from the OEMs to drive more personable and more real-world training scenarios into this scenario-based training topic?
Yeah. I mean, I'm chomping at the bit to figure out like how do we create a more personalized training experience? And I love Lindsay's comment because she's spot on that we have this complexity that comes as an organization like ours when we're doing a class of initials, and maybe it's a 429 class, and I've got 6 customers in it, and they're all coming from different industries. They're all coming with different skill sets. As part of that, you may have a 50-hour guy, you may have a 5,000-hour guy in that class, and trying to figure out like how do we really fine tune that? And we're in the early stages of, I think, being able to really get meaningful fleet data back off of aircraft. And what I see as an opportunity, again, we haven't figured out how to really tap into it yet, but with that kind of fleet data, I would love as a customer walks into my building for me to look at them and say, hey, we've done some trend analysis, anonymized your data, but we understand that you're dropping back left skid as you're coming in on landings pretty consistently. So we already know, we know before they've set foot in the building that, okay, here's something, again, with free time that we're talking about in a curriculum. How do we help target then a skill that maybe you're not even perceptive of as a customer, but we can build off of that? Or how do we take that fleet data and, again, feed it into a simulation environment in a way that says, okay, we know and understand, when we're going to go spend some time today, I'm going to go pull up your geography in the world. We're gonna run you through the scenarios that make sense for you. We're still going to practice the emergency procedures, but let's put it in your context. So I think there's several opportunities there for us to tap into that. I'm excited about 525. It's got a metric ton of IDHM data and other stuff coming off of it. Again, we're trying to figure out how do we tap into it and create meaningful insights. I don't want to information saturate us. I want meaningful insights that come into the academy that then we can create a more personalized training experience. So my 2 cents worth on it.
Lindsay, what do you think?
I agree completely. In a perfect world, easier on the airline side because they're flying standardized approaches. They're flying from point A to point B. But in the rotorcraft industry, obviously, we have so many different types of missions. So when you talk about flight data monitoring, how do you even define an event trigger if you're doing a scene landing, whatever? So I think the best way that we can kind of aggregate that into something that's meaningful is really to request that feedback from the individual operators who have flight data monitoring departments or safety teams. So PHI is an example. They do a pretty good job of identifying maybe their top trends that they're seeing from their FDM program, and what is generally going to be true. I think for PHI would probably also be relevant for a smaller oil and gas operator or air medical operator that's performing the same mission. So just kind of taking some of that, but a little bit. Not just a little bit, but very challenging, I would say, at the OEM level to provide meaningful feedback based on so many different mission profiles, so many different types of flight data monitoring equipment, especially when it's retrofitted into the legacy fleet. So,
That's really interesting. I mean, it's gathering the availability to gather so much data and information and to feed it into these advanced technologies and computer systems and simulation. It's amazing what they'll be able to do today, and not only tomorrow and next week and 10 years from now. It's unbelievable. So our time has gone by pretty fast. So I'd like to do a few final wrap-up questions for you guys. So when we think about everything that we've been talking about here today, I'd like to ask two final questions to the group. So how, in your view, how will new technologies affect training centers, training device manufacturers, and what can we expect in the future? As well as what training devices and methods will support the next generation using those new technologies and new devices. I don't know, let's whoever wants to.
I'll go first. Yeah, so I'll start from the root. So some of the obvious ones you'll see is products, and I'll let maybe the training centers talk about some technology influence that is happening on the products they're using. But maybe one that you don't see, but you'll recognize on paper later in the future is the impact that artificial intelligence is having just in the within our facilities. And we're seeing it kind of evolve from supporting prototyping and what you would find in maybe 3D printing and modifications in the hardware and development teams. We're starting to really see it infuse into the software engineering groups, where they're using artificial intelligence to help detect bugs within the software code, to create automated testing environments. I saw an engineer just the other day, within seconds, was able to add comments to thousands of lines of code. So it was able to scan through all this logic and provide side comments for each one, enabling him to then further detect where the troubles were happening or what to modify to better fit the pilot that was complaining about a field or an instance. This is going to translate, like I said, back into paperwork where you're going to see that sims can be provided to you a lot faster, a lot cheaper. They're going to be a lot more agile to respond to changes with software development in the marketplace. A Garmin, a Rockwell, a vendor of an avionics system makes changes. We'll have the ability to leverage some of that technology to quickly make those changes and deploy it to site at a higher yield rate, right? So to be able to get across as a software release that's a lot more confident and a lot higher quality than what you may experience in the past. So I think on the execution side, you'll have the ability to get devices into place sooner, closer to when you need them, versus trying to plan ahead a year or 2 years in advance. And I think that's going to be a really sweet spot when we have incidents that need to be trained into the pilot community that today we have to delay or wait on.
Randy?
Yeah, so I'd say, kind of dovetailing into what Zach said, we've already kind of deployed an AI virtualized instructor with our Navy TH-73 ground-based training system, because we all recognize the need for more cost-effective training, but we want self-paced learning, which is what most of the next generation is familiar with doing. My son learned how to solve Rubik's Cube watching a YouTube video. So, that's exactly the demographic. They have different learning methodologies, different learning ways of learning. And, I look at this back as, it's no different than being an instructor, right? You can say something to the first 4 students you have, they all get it inherently, pick it up, learn it, fine. You get to that 5th student, you say the same thing, and they just don't process it the same way. So I think it's just, with some of the AI and machine learning things that are out there now, it's easier to make learning a little bit more adaptive to the individual, rather than to have to so carefully script your training curriculum, the simulation environment, to the point of where everything has to flow perfectly. Otherwise, you realize it's a simulation, right? And even things like synthetic ATC that's out there now, trying to create a more immersive environment, because the training efficacy that you do in the simulator will then translate better when you get into the aircraft. We don't want that aircraft to be drinking from the fire hose, because when we get to the aircraft, we want that flight to be meaningful and impactful, and not just basic lower levels of learning, right? So the caveat to all this technology, though, is it has its limitations. We have to get smart about the limitations that can sneak into it, because we're still in its infancy. We don't really know what we don't know yet. So we have to be careful on how we employ that. But I think where we see this going, at the end of the day, is we have to make sure that it's a positive transfer of training. That whatever we're putting in the training device, lower level, full flight, whatever the case may be, is that we're very careful monitoring the output and the performance of that student to ensure that what we're getting is the intended consequences, and we're not getting off track a little bit.
Lindsay?
Not much to add to that, other than just, to reiterate, back to the, I would say, portable, accessible, higher level avionics, things in as simple of a form as an iPad app, because to maintain that proficiency of your autopilot system, your avionics suite, to just maintain that proficiency. We see a lot of customers who maybe they fly PBA, and maybe they get to fly their aircraft 2 times a year, and sometimes we see them twice a year for recurrent training, and they haven't flown between the time they, between their recurrent trainings, because maybe their aircraft is in maintenance or it's on a yacht somewhere. So just something to maintain that true proficiency in terms of the software.
One thing that I think excites me thinking about what some of the emerging technology enables is, the training center model today fundamentally is kind of a centralized model. Facilities like Lindsay and mine, we have a set of fairly capital intensive assets that we have in a single place that allows our customers to come and train with us. As we look towards some of these enabling technologies, VR being one, but some of these other virtual learning, the intent is we can shift that towards a more distributed training model, which in the end I think really excites me about the opportunity. Just more training is better for the community by and large. The more we can make that easy for people to get to, we can make it affordable. That's all goodness for us in the end. I balance that excitement with a little trepidation around. Again, I've got regulatory friends in the room, but one of the burdens that I know that we face as a training center is, any given week I have a regulator from some agency around the world that is basically doing the same audit and inspection that the person the week before did as part of it. And it's a tax on the organization. It drags us down. It spends resources in places that, frankly, I would rather spend on getting additional training assets or integrating AI into our curriculum. Like we're spending things in areas where it doesn't feel as value added at the end of the day. So the more we're able to get alignment across the regulatory agencies where we can streamline those processes, that will be a long-term win for us in totality, not just for the audit headache that I wake up with every night. So that's my yin and yang of how I think about the future.
All right, well, with that, I'd like to close out the simulation and training panel discussion for Verticon 2025. I'd like to thank the panelists for their participation and input into making this happen in this important discussion. I'd also like to thank Ms. Terry Palmer. I'd like to thank Greg Brown and BAI for their support in putting this event together. All right, well, thank you, everybody.